Windsor Castle is one of the most important secular buildings in the country and the largest inhabited castle in the world. The original castle was built in the 11th century, and since the 12th century it has been used by the reigning monarch. It is like a small fortified town, covering 13 acres and containing home for scores of people. William the Conqueror's son, Henry I, had domestic quarters at the castle, but it was his grandson, Henry II, who converted the castle into a palace and replaced much of the original wooden structure with stone. The lower part of the iconic round tower is part of Henry II's palace. The castle is divided into three distinct areas. The lower ward, which contains St George's Chapel and church offices, the middle ward, where the round tower is to be found, and the upper ward, with the state apartments, the quadrangle, and the George IV gateway leading to the Long Walk. Henry II's grandson, Henry III, was the greatest builder of his age, with Westminster Abbey being a major achievement. He completely rebuilt his grandfather's buildings, and he added a large new chapel. This chapel was destroyed in the 16th century, but the magnificent doors by a man called the Gilibertus remain to this day. Even this ambitious building programme was eclipsed 100 years later by Edward III. He transformed the castle into a vast Gothic palace, redolent with the medieval ideas of chivalry. The building was funded by the spoils of war. Edward had comprehensively defeated the French at Crécy and Poitiers, and Windsor celebrated these military triumphs. The chivalric ideal was important to Edward, and he had tried to form an association of knights to emulate King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table. When this didn't progress, he founded in 1348 what is now the oldest order of chivalry, the most noble order of the Garter. This continues to this day in its original form. The membership consists of 24 Garter Knights chosen in recognition of their work. They are chosen personally by the sovereign to honour those who have held public office, have contributed in a particular way to national life, or who have served the sovereigns personally. The honour is also offered to royalty from other countries. Annual Garter Day usually takes place in June. If a place becomes vacant during the year, the new appointment is announced on April the 23rd, St George's Day, and the induction takes place at the June event. The Order's spiritual home is St George's Chapel. This chapel is built in high medieval Gothic style. It is a royal peculiar, which means a church under the direct jurisdiction of the monarch. It is located in the lower ward of the castle. St George's Castle Chapel was originally founded in the 14th century by Edward III, and it was attached to the chapel of St Edward the Confessor, which had been constructed by Henry III. The chapel was then rededicated to the Blessed Virgin Mary, George the Martyr, and Edward the Confessor, but soon became known only by its dedication to St George. The present wonderful Gothic structure was begun in 1475 during the reign of Edward IV and finished by the first Tudor monarchs Henry VII and Henry VIII. From the ceiling of the choir of the chapel hang the banners of the current Garter Knights, whilst on the walls are the coats of arms of most of those who have been knights since the order's inception in 1348. 10 monarchs are buried in the chapel, including those shown here, as well as the parents and grandparents of our present Queen. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert are buried at Frognall House, a mile away in Windsor Great Park. As a quick aside, it is worth remembering that Henry VI has a special connection with the area, as he was responsible for the founding of Eton College, which is just across the river from the castle and is shown here. There are some wonderful memorials and statues in the chapel. This one commemorates Princess Charlotte, the only daughter of King George IV and the only legitimate grandchild of George III. Had she lived, she would have become queen, but she predeceased both her father and her grandfather, dying in childbirth at aged only 21. In the event, it was her cousin Victoria who eventually became queen. Over the centuries, Different monarchs have spent fortunes putting their own stamp on the castle and its grounds. It was Charles II who was responsible for the ornate staterooms, and it was he who commissioned the fashionable Italian artist Antonio Verrio to paint some of the wonderful ceilings which continue to impress today. He was also responsible for the avenue of elm trees that joined the castle to Windsor Great Park. It's known as the Long Walk and is 2.5 miles in length. He also commissioned this equestrian statue of himself that stands on the quadrangle on the upper ward. This was only the second equestrian statue of an English monarch, and it's based on the first one, which is of his father, Charles I, and now stands off Trafalgar Square at the top of Whitehall. Two of the notable changes made by George IV were the extending of the round tower by a further 30 feet in height, and the building of the George IV Gate, which forms a suitably grand entrance to the upper ward from the Long Walk. During a year of family problems for the Queen, things were made worse for her when a fire broke out in the private chapel of the northeast corner of the upper ward. Despite the efforts of the castle staff and the fire brigade, the fire spread rapidly at roof level, and many of the rooms were destroyed. By good fortune, many were empty at the time as they were undergoing restoration, and so miraculously few of the artistic treasures were damaged. Damage to the building was immense, but restoration work started immediately. The work was funded by the royal family. Among other things, they raised funds by opening Buckingham Palace to the public, a move which has proved popular ever since. The restoration work has been remarkable. As an example, this is what St George's Hall looked like after the fire, and it was transformed from this back to this. The restoration was completed on time and under budget, and was unveiled for the Queen's golden wedding anniversary, the 20th of November 1997, almost exactly 5 years after the fire. So once again, St George's Hall is capable of serving a banquet to 160 guests. And so, with the castle fully restored and back in its place as one of the foremost symbols of Britain's heritage and pageantry, the town continues to attract millions of tourists each year, and looks set to continue for another 1,000 years. And what better way than to play us out with this?